Welcome to this presentation, titled A Quick Look at Adaptive Learning. This presentation is meant to give you a brief overview of how adaptive learning can be used within instructional design contexts. Hopefully, it will whet your appetite and motivate you to consider how adaptive learning can be incorporated into your own instruction and training programs. So, what is adaptive learning? Well, anything you want it to be. Okay, adaptive learning may not quite be this simple, but it does make for a good dad joke. According to Wang et al., adaptive learning is systems-based learning that incorporates artificial intelligence to provide tutoring assistance. Adaptive learning is based on a closed-loop structure that collects data from the learner, processes the data against predefined domain, student, and task models and rules, and then recommends learning activities and provides feedback based on results. Adaptive learning, or adaptive teaching, allows teachers to deliver customized learning experiences that address the unique needs of an individual through just-in-time feedback, pathways, and resources. This allows teachers to provide personalized learning experiences rather than just providing a one-size-fits-all approach. So let's take a look at some common methods of adaptive learning. First, there's delivery and modality. Adaptive learning can, at a very basic level, refer to adaptations in delivery technique or modality. Imagine, for instance, that a student uses their personal home assistant to continue studying via audio means when they had started on an e-textbook. But delivery modalities really only scratch the surface of what it means to have adaptive learning. Next is content design. Adaptive content design incorporates guided content pathways based on learner interactions. This method of adaptive learning is easy to implement, but it takes a while to set up. That's because there are usually a number of if this, then that decision trees that need to be traversed and accounted for as pathways are being designed. Next is adaptive sequencing. Adaptive sequencing is the most commonly recognized form of adaptive learning. This is the closed-loop experience identified in the original definition. In this method, the content experience is driven by overall performance and data collection. This method is the most difficult to implement, but it results in highly personalized learning experiences. The last method is adaptive assessment. Adaptive assessment is even another method of adaptive learning, and it can include any level of assessment, diagnostic, formative, or summative, to determine how well users have learned specific concepts and ideas. Okay, so you might be wondering, how can I use adaptive learning in my own training and instruction? Well, as Captain Picard tells us here, it's at least a little bit complicated. Okay, it's complicated, but let's consider a scenario. First, we start with microlearning. Microlearning allows for module creation and learner engagement at a low level of content to address specific knowledge gaps. Once we have that content in place, we can incorporate diagnostic testing using adaptive techniques to determine a learner's current level of knowledge. Learners engage in dynamically created sequences based on the results of their diagnostic testing and learner analytics that go along with it. This requires data. Yes, a lot of data. We need that diagnostic testing in order to be able to determine how exactly those microlearning modules should be linked together for the learner. Then we can use formative assessment within those microlearning modules to indicate need for reinforcement in specific areas. Ultimately, summative assessment establishes a requisite level of achievement. So once we get to this level, if there are areas in which the summative assessment tells us that the learner is still struggling, we may point the learner back to those microlearning modules to cover that content again before we actually say, yes, okay, you've mastered the content. So that's a scenario in which we could actually use adaptive learning in a few different ways. Okay, so what does it take to actually use and implement adaptive learning? Well, like most professional projects, it takes some combination of resources, money, and time. Money and time are most obvious, but the point is that a good project will generally require all three to be successful. Planning is crucial when developing adaptive solutions. It's important to plan for data collection on learners ahead of the design process so that the content types, types of learning pathways, and adaptive needs can be well understood. Adaptive software tools can be expensive, and they're time intensive for learning and course creation. Additionally, analytics require data. The amount and types of data will vary based on the project, but strategies and software for analytics should be well considered and documented. Perhaps one of the most important elements, it also takes well designed assessments. Diagnostic, formative, and even summative assessments can all redirect learners to content areas where additional mastery is required. Such assessments are not only there to serve and inform the learners about the level of achievement reached within their learning, but also to inform project stakeholders of the overall efficacy of the program. Okay, that wraps it up. I appreciate your time today. I do hope you're able to find something interesting about adaptive learning and that it piqued your interest and prompts you to develop your own adaptive learning solutions. Thank you again.